dramatic rescue, a miracle, happened to a dying mother cat and her adorable kittens. What if the miracle wasn't just saving a dying mother cat and her helpless kittens? Prepare yourself, because the most heart-stopping moment in Bella's rescue reveals a twist that suggests her accident might have been no accident at all. Like, subscribe and listen now to uncover the full story. The screech of locked tires slicing through the relentless drumming of rain was sickeningly familiar, yet this time it felt different, personal. It was followed by a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the soles of John's worn work boots, a sound that spoke of finality. He flinched, pulling the collar of his old jacket tighter against the downpour that plastered gray hair to his temples. Another late-night delivery truck, probably rushing to make schedule on slick asphalt. He'd seen it happen before on this poorly lit stretch of suburban road bordering the industrial park. Deer, raccoons, stray dogs. But the small, crumpled shape illuminated momentarily by the receding taillights wasn't a deer. It was too small, too tragically still. John hesitated for only a second. Curiosity warred with a weary desire to just get home, out of the miserable Ohio chill that seeped into his bones. But something about the absolute stillness of the form pulled at him. He crossed the street, raindrops blurring his vision, the air thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. Kneeling cautiously, the harsh glare of a distant street lamp revealed a calico cat, her fur matted and dark with rain, and something else. Something horrifyingly red that pooled beneath her. Her breathing was a ragged, almost imperceptible flutter. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a low, guttural moan escaped her, barely audible above the storm. It wasn't the yowl of pain he might have expected, but a sound deeper, more primal, a sound of utter despair. He recognized the distinctive patches of orange, black, and white, muted now by grime and blood. He'd seen this cat before, skulking near the dumpsters behind the diner where he sometimes grabbed coffee, always wary, always thin. Bella, the baristas called her, though he doubted she'd ever answered to it. He saw the faint twitch of her whiskers, the almost imperceptible tightening of muscles around her jaw, as if trying to lift her head. Her eyes, usually wide and alert with feral caution, were glazed, unfocused, staring into a distance only she could see. The rain hammered down, washing some of the blood away only to reveal more, painting a grim tableau on the glistening blacktop. He felt a sudden sharp pang of empathy, a connection to this small, broken creature fighting a losing battle against physics and fate. The truck was long gone, leaving only the rain, the darkness, and the dying cat. He couldn't just leave her here. He didn't know why, not really, but the thought was intolerable. The image of her small, broken body being washed into the gutter by the relentless storm spurred him into action, even as the hopelessness of the situation washed over him. He had to do something. John Peterson wasn't typically prone to impulsive acts of rescue. 67 years old, retired after 4 decades spent wrestling with stubborn engines and greasy transmissions at Miller's Auto Repair, his life had settled into a quiet rhythm. His days were marked by coffee at sunrise, tinkering with an old motorcycle in his garage, tending the small vegetable patch behind his modest clapboard house, and evening walks, rain or shine, to stretch his legs and clear his head. His wife, Martha, had passed 3 years prior, and the house often felt too large, too silent. The stray cats that frequented the neighborhood were fleeting figures in his periphery, creatures he observed with a detached sort of sympathy, occasionally leaving out a dish of water on hot days, but never engaging further. He wasn't unfriendly, just settled, set in his ways. This particular evening, the walk was more necessity than pleasure. The rain had been relentless all day, a typical Midwestern spring deluge, and the confinement was making him restless. He'd almost turned back twice, but the thought of another evening staring at the television pushed him onward, jacket zipped high, head down against the wind-driven sheets of water. He was thinking about the leaky gasket on the old Triumph Bonneville in his garage, mentally running through the steps to fix it, when the screech of tires jolted him back to the present. Seeing Bella lying broken on the asphalt wasn't just seeing a stray cat. He'd noticed her more than the others lately. She'd seemed heavier a few weeks ago, her movements slower, more deliberate. Then, more recently, she'd appeared suddenly gaunt, almost skeletal, yet driven by a frantic energy he hadn't seen before. He'd seen her darting into the shadowed alley behind O'Malley's pub, ignoring the scraps he sometimes left out near his own garbage cans. He'd idly wondered about it, the way you wonder about the trajectory of a bird or the pattern of clouds, before dismissing it. Now, kneeling beside her, the earlier observations clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She hadn't just been scavenging for herself. She'd recently given birth. Somewhere, hidden away from the rain and the dangers of the street, were kittens, helpless, waiting for a mother who wasn't coming back. That realization was the spark. It transformed the situation from a sad inevitability into an urgent crisis. It wasn't just about Bella anymore. It was about the unseen, unheard lives that depended entirely on her. The image of tiny, blind kittens huddled together, growing cold and hungry, waiting in vain, flooded his mind. It was an unbearable thought. He gently scooped Bella up. She was limp, barely reacting, her body radiating a terrifying coldness despite the blood. His old coat, a worn but thick wool blend, became an impromptu shroud and stretcher. He cradled her against his chest, shielding her as best he could from the driving rain, and started walking faster now, toward the only place he could think of, the 24-hour emergency veterinary clinic on the other side of town. It was miles away, but it was the only option. Dr. Evans, the night vet, was young, efficient, but her expression turned grim as soon as she saw Bella laid out on the stainless steel examination table. The initial assessment was brutal. Massive internal bleeding, multiple fractures including a shattered pelvis, severe shock, hypothermia. "John," she said, knowing him from the few times he'd brought in neighbors' pets over the years, her voice gentle but firm. "Her chances are virtually non-existent. The damage is too extensive. Euthanasia would be the kindest thing." John looked down at the still form, the faint rise and fall of her flank, the only sign of life. He thought of the kittens, alone in the dark. "No," he heard himself say, the word raspy, determined. "She's got babies out there somewhere, newborns. They need her." He fumbled for his wallet. "Do whatever you can, please. I don't care what it costs. Just try." Dr. Evans hesitated, looking from John's pleading eyes to the seemingly hopeless case on her table. She saw the desperation, the sudden, fierce protectiveness in this quiet, unassuming man. It was against her better judgment, perhaps, but something in his conviction swayed her. "Okay, John," she sighed, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. "We'll try. We'll stabilize her, get fluids and pain meds in, run some diagnostics. But I need you to understand, it's a long shot, a very long shot." That was the inciting incident. The moment John Peterson, the quiet retiree, committed himself, not just to a dying cat, but to an invisible family. His goal was no longer just to ease suffering, but to fight for a life, and to find and save the lives that depended on it. He left Bella in Dr. Evans' capable, if doubtful, hands, and walked back out into the rain, not towards home, but towards the dark, forbidding alley behind O'Malley's pub. He had Kittens to find. The alley was a narrow chasm between brick buildings, choked with overflowing dumpsters, discarded pallets, and the general detritus of urban neglect. The rain had turned the ground into a slick, foul-smelling soup. John, armed only with a cheap flashlight whose beam struggled against the oppressive darkness and sheeting rain, felt a surge of hopelessness. Where would a mother cat hide her newborns? It could be anywhere. Under a dumpster, inside a rotting cardboard box, tucked into a crevice in the crumbling foundation. He started systematically, his flashlight beam sweeping methodically across the grim landscape. He peered under dumpsters, his knees protesting as he knelt on the cold, wet concrete. He poked cautiously at sodden piles of trash bags, wrinkling his nose at the stench of decay. The only sounds were the relentless drumming of the rain, the distant rumble of traffic, and the frantic thumping of his own heart. Minutes stretched into an agonizing half-hour. He was soaked through, chilled to the bone, and starting to doubt his conviction. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the kittens weren't here. Maybe they weren't even real. Just as despair began to set in, he heard it. A tiny, high-pitched sound, almost lost in the noise of the storm. A mewling cry, thin and desperate. He froze, straining his ears, sweeping the flashlight beam towards the sound. It came again, from behind a stack of flattened cardboard boxes leaning against the pub's back wall. He carefully pulled the wet cardboard away, and there they were, huddled together in a shallow depression lined with scraps of newspaper and dry leaves, now mostly soaked, were 4 tiny kittens. Smaller than his fist, their eyes were still sealed shut, their fur damp and matted. They were squirming feebly, blindly seeking warmth and nourishment that wasn't there. One, a little orange tabby, let out another plaintive cry. Relief washed over John, so potent it almost buckled his knees, quickly followed by a fresh wave of urgency. They were alive, but incredibly vulnerable. They wouldn't last long out here alone. Gently, careful not to disturb them more than necessary, he scooped them up, nestling them inside the driest part of his already damp jacket, zipping it up to create a warm, dark pouch against his chest. He could feel their tiny bodies trembling against his own skin. He whispered reassurances he wasn't sure they could hear, his voice thick with emotion. "It's okay, little ones. It's okay. I've got you." Getting them home was the next challenge. He lived nearly 2 miles away, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. He couldn't risk them getting colder. He fumbled for his phone, relieved to find it still working despite the damp, and called the only cab company that reliably ran this late. Waiting under the meager shelter of a dripping awning, shielding the precious cargo inside his jacket, he felt a profound sense of responsibility settle over him. This was real. He was now the sole protector of these fragile lives. Back in the warmth and light of his own kitchen, the scale of the task ahead truly hit him. He carefully transferred the kittens into a cardboard box lined with old, clean towels, placing it near the radiator for warmth. They were so small, so utterly dependent. He knew next to nothing about raising neonatal kittens. A frantic internet search on his old desktop computer brought up terrifying terms: fading kitten syndrome, aspiration pneumonia, hypothermia. He learned about specialized kitten milk replacer, KMR, feeding schedules every 2 to 3 hours around the clock, the need to stimulate them to urinate and defecate. His first trip back out into the relentless rain was to the 24-hour superstore. He returned laden with KMR, specialized feeding bottles with tiny nipples, a heating pad designed for pets, soft cloths, and baby wipes. The first feeding attempt was clumsy, bordering on disastrous. The kittens wriggled, refused the nipple, or latched on so weakly that milk dribbled down their chins. John, his large, calloused mechanic's hands feeling impossibly awkward, fumbled with the tiny bottle, terrified of feeding them too fast or too slow, of hurting them. It took nearly an hour to get a meager amount of milk into each of them, followed by the delicate process of stimulating them with a warm, damp cloth. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. John set alarms for every 2 hours, dozing fitfully in his armchair between feedings. His quiet, ordered retirement dissolved into a chaotic cycle of mixing formula, warming bottles, gentle feeding, meticulous cleaning, and constant worry. He checked on the kittens incessantly, monitoring their breathing, touching them gently to gauge their temperature, listening for the soft sounds of contentment or the dreaded cries of distress. Meanwhile, updates from the vet clinic were a roller coaster. Bella had survived the initial surgery to repair the worst of the internal damage and stop the bleeding. She'd received a blood transfusion, but she remained in critical condition, unconscious, hooked up to fluids and monitors. Dr. Evans was cautiously non-committal. "She's fighting, John," she'd said during one of his calls, her voice tinged with professional weariness. "But she's incredibly weak. Her body's taken a massive trauma. Infection is a huge risk, and the pelvic fractures. Even if she pulls through, her mobility might be permanently compromised." The cost was mounting rapidly. Emergency surgery, intensive care, medications. It was adding up to thousands of dollars John hadn't budgeted for in his fixed income. He started eating simpler meals, turning down the thermostat, scrutinizing every expenditure. He dipped into the savings account he and Martha had earmarked for emergencies, the fund steadily dwindling with each passing day Bella spent in the ICU. Doubt gnawed at him. Was he doing the right thing? Pouring money he couldn't really afford into a cat the vet thought wouldn't make it, while neglecting his own needs, exhausting himself caring for kittens he might not be able to save? He found an unexpected ally in Maria, one of the younger vet techs at the clinic. Seeing John's obvious devotion and his fumbling attempts at kitten care during a brief checkup visit for the little ones, Dr. Evans insisted, given their rough start, Maria took pity on him. She showed him better feeding techniques, explained how to recognize subtle signs of trouble, and offered practical tips gleaned from years of fostering orphan litters. She even gave him her personal number, telling him to call any time, day or night, if he was worried. Her kindness was a small buoy in his sea of exhaustion and anxiety. The kittens, under his painstaking care, began to stabilize. They started gaining tiny amounts of weight. Their mews became stronger, their movements less feeble. He learned their personalities, the bold orange tabby, the shy calico patch identical to her mother's, the vocal gray one, the quiet black runt who needed extra encouragement to eat. They became the focus of his world, their survival intrinsically linked to Bella's. He started talking to Bella during his brief, hushed visits to the clinic, holding his phone close to her still form so she could hear recordings he'd made of the kittens mewling. "You hear that, girl?" he'd whisper, his voice thick. "They're waiting for you. You gotta fight." 10 days had passed since the accident. 10 days of John living in a fog of sleep deprivation, anxiety, and lukewarm KMR. The rhythm of his life was now dictated by 2-hour feeding schedules and the beeping monitors at the veterinary clinic. The kittens were growing, albeit slowly. Their eyes had opened, revealing hazy blue irises that stared blankly at the world. They were starting to stumble around their towel-lined box on wobbly legs, tiny purrs occasionally rumbling when John managed a successful feeding. They were fragile sparks of life, demanding constant vigilance. Bella, however, remained static. She was alive, technically. The immediate crises, the internal bleeding, the initial shock, had been managed, but she hadn't regained consciousness. She lay inert in her oxygenated cage, a patchwork of shaved fur, stitches, and IV lines. Dr. Evans spoke of potential neurological damage from the impact or temporary oxygen deprivation. The term persistent vegetative state had been cautiously mentioned, a possibility that hung heavy in the sterile air of the clinic. The astronomical vet bill continued to climb, a constant low-grade hum of worry beneath John's exhaustion. He was spending his emergency fund at an alarming rate, the money he and Martha had saved for house repairs or, ironically, his own potential health crises. He was at the clinic for his afternoon visit, sitting on a stool beside Bella's cage, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, feeling the familiar weight of despair settle over him. He'd just come from another frustrating feeding session with the black runt, who seemed weaker today. He was tired, bone-achingly tired. He questioned his decision again, more intensely this time. Was he prolonging suffering? Was he bankrupting himself for a lost cause? Maybe Dr. Evans had been right initially. Maybe kindness had morphed into foolish stubbornness. He reached a hand through the cage bars, gently stroking the small patch of intact fur on Bella's head. "Come on, girl," he murmured, his voice rough with fatigue. "Just show me something, anything." He spoke about the kittens, describing their tiny triumphs, the first shaky steps, the way the gray one always yelled the loudest for food. He didn't know if she could hear him, if any part of her registered his presence or his words, but he kept talking, needing to fill the silence, needing to believe it mattered. He was about to leave, his shoulders slumped, when it happened. A flicker, an eyelid twitched, not just a random spasm, but a definite, albeit weak, movement. John froze, holding his breath. Did he imagine it? He watched intently. Then slowly, miraculously, one of Bella's eyes cracked open. It wasn't the clear, alert gaze he remembered from her days as a wary stray. It was clouded, unfocused, swimming back from a deep abyss. But it was open. Her head gave a tiny, almost imperceptible lift from the bedding. A low, raspy sound, something between a groan and a weak meow, vibrated in her chest. John's heart leaped. "Bella," he whispered, leaning closer. "Bella, can you hear me?" Her eye didn't track him, didn't seem to register his presence specifically, but it stayed open. It was the first voluntary movement, the first sign of conscious awareness he'd seen in 10 days. He scrambled to find the call button, his hands trembling. Dr. Evans came quickly, alerted by the urgency in John's voice. She performed a quick neurological check, shining a light into Bella's eyes, checking reflexes. The vet's expression shifted from professional concern to cautious surprise. "Well, John," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice, "it seems your girl isn't ready to give up just yet. Pupils are reactive. She's definitely more responsive." She listened to Bella's heart and lungs again. Still critical, still a very long road ahead, especially with those pelvic fractures. But this is significant. This is the first real step forward. It was more than a step. It was a seismic shift. Seeing that flicker of life, that minuscule sign of consciousness return, shattered John's mounting despair. It was proof. Proof that his efforts, his expense, his sleepless nights weren't entirely in vain. Hope, tentative but fierce, surged back through him, washing away the fatigue and doubt. This was the turning point. He walked out of the clinic that day feeling lighter than he had in weeks, despite the unchanged financial burden and the long recovery still ahead. He stopped at the pet store on the way home, not just for more KMR, but for a larger enclosure for the kittens, ones with shallow sides they could eventually learn to climb out of. He bought tiny, soft toys. He bought better quality food for himself, realizing he needed to sustain his own strength for the long haul. His role had subtly shifted. He was no longer just reacting to a crisis, desperately trying to keep fragile lives afloat. He was now actively planning for a future that included Bella. The possibility of failure still loomed, but it no longer paralyzed him. He had seen a spark in the darkness, and he was going to fan it into a flame. There was no turning back now. He was all in, committed to seeing this through, whatever it took. He went home, fed the kittens with renewed patience and determination, and even managed a smile when the little black runt finally latched onto the bottle with surprising vigor. Maybe, just maybe, they were all going to make it. The weeks following Bella's flicker of consciousness were a grueling uphill climb, marked by small victories and frightening setbacks. Progress was agonizingly slow, a testament to the severity of her injuries. Regaining consciousness was one thing, healing was another entirely. Bella remained weak, her body struggling to mend shattered bones and traumatized tissues. Eating was a major hurdle. Initially, she had to be fed through a syringe, a painstaking process that often resulted in more food smeared on the bedding than ingested. John visited daily, sometimes twice, spending hours patiently coaxing her, his voice low and encouraging. He brought recordings of the kittens, hoping the familiar sounds would stimulate her maternal instincts and her will to live. Dr. Evans and Maria taught him basic physical therapy exercises he could do with Bella. Gentle flexing and extending of her front legs, careful massage to prevent muscle atrophy, while her pelvis remained immobilized, awaiting surgical stabilization once she was strong enough. Just as they seemed to be making headway, infection set in. Bella developed a fever, became lethargic again, refusing even the syringed food. John's heart sank. He spent frantic hours conferring with Dr. Evans, authorizing aggressive antibiotic treatments, the cost adding another heavy layer to his financial anxieties. He watched her through the cage bars, his hope flickering like a candle in a draft. Had they come this far only to lose her now? Simultaneously, the kittens presented their own set of challenges. They were growing rapidly, transitioning from helpless newborns into rambunctious, exploring toddlers. Their enclosure, once a safe haven, became a launch pad for clumsy escape attempts. John upgraded them to a large dog crate lined with blankets, providing more space for their awkward tumbles and playful pounces. Weaning them onto solid food was another messy, chaotic milestone. John's kitchen floor became permanently decorated with smudges of kitten mush. They required constant supervision, their newfound mobility leading them into potentially hazardous situations, batting at electrical cords, attempting to scale curtains, getting stuck in impossibly small spaces. One afternoon, the little calico kitten, Patches, suddenly became listless. She refused food, cried weakly, and felt alarmingly cool to the touch. Panic seized John. He recognized the signs Maria had warned him about: potential fading kitten syndrome. He rushed her to the clinic, his heart pounding against his ribs. Dr. Evans acted quickly, administering subcutaneous fluids and glucose, placing Patches in an incubator. For 48 terrifying hours, her life hung in the balance. John barely slept, hovering by the phone, his worry for Patches compounding his anxiety about Bella. Miraculously, Patches rallied, her tiny body finding the strength to fight back. Bringing her home, weak but recovering, John felt another wave of profound relief, mixed with the stark realization of how precarious their survival truly was. The emotional toll on John was immense. He was perpetually exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine. His tidy house was now in a state of controlled chaos, smelling faintly of kitten formula and disinfectant. His savings account was nearly depleted. He started using his credit card for groceries, a move that felt like a defeat. There were moments, usually late at night, sitting alone after the kittens had finally settled down, when the weight of it all felt crushing. He'd stare at the mounting vet bills spread across his kitchen table, the numbers swimming before his tired eyes. He'd think about the Triumph Bonneville gathering dust in the garage, the simple, predictable life he used to have. Was he crazy? Had one impulsive act of kindness derailed his entire life? This was his dark night of the soul, a period of profound doubt where the finish line seemed impossibly distant, obscured by setbacks and exhaustion. Yet, quitting never truly felt like an option. Every time he looked at the trusting faces of the kittens peering up at him, every time he saw a flicker of recognition in Bella's eyes during his visits, his resolve solidified. Maria, the vet tech, became a crucial source of support, not just with practical advice, but with encouragement. "You're doing amazing, John," she'd tell him sincerely. "Most people wouldn't have bothered. Bella's lucky to have you. They are lucky." Slowly, painstakingly, Bella continued to improve. The infection cleared. She began to lap up watered-down recovery food on her own. She started grooming herself weekly, a positive sign. The light in her eyes grew clearer, more focused. She would watch John intently when he visited, occasionally emitting a soft, rumbling purr when he stroked her head. Dr. Evans finally deemed her stable enough for the complex surgery needed to pin her shattered pelvis. It was another risky procedure, another significant expense, but it was essential if Bella was ever to walk again. John didn't hesitate. He signed the consent forms, his hand steady despite the tremor of fear in his gut. The surgery was long, intricate, but ultimately successful. The days following were tense, focused on pain management and preventing complications. But Bella proved her resilience once again. She tolerated the discomfort, her innate toughness shining through. As the weeks passed, she began to put tentative weight on her repaired leg during supported therapy sessions. She started moving around her recovery cage with more confidence, albeit with a noticeable limp. Dr. Evans finally delivered the news John had been desperately hoping for. "She's ready, John, ready to come home. She'll need continued monitoring, confinement for a while longer, and careful management of her mobility. But she's stable. She's healed enough." The final hurdle was preparing his house. He cleared out his small spare bedroom, kitten-proofing it meticulously. He set up Bella's recovery crate, food and water bowls, a low-entry litter box. He bought specialized joint supplements recommended by Dr. Evans. He spent hours cleaning, organizing, preparing for the arrival of the matriarch. The kittens, now nearly 8 weeks old, were miniature whirlwinds of energy, oblivious to the impending reunion, but sensing the shift in John's demeanor, the undercurrent of nervous excitement. The stage was set. The culmination of weeks of struggle, hope, and sheer willpower was finally at hand. John felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. Bringing Bella home was the goal, the climax he had worked towards, but it was also the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. The drive home from the clinic was fraught with a quiet tension. Bella sat subdued in a sturdy carrier on the passenger seat, occasionally letting out a soft, questioning meow. She looked small and frail against the carrier's plastic confines, her fur clean but patchy in places where it had been shaved for surgery and IV lines. Her prominent limp was a stark reminder of the trauma she'd endured. John drove slowly, cautiously, acutely aware of his precious cargo. He kept glancing over, murmuring soft words of reassurance, though whether they were for Bella or himself, he wasn't entirely sure. He carried her inside, setting the carrier down gently in the middle of the living room floor. The 4 kittens, alerted by the new sounds and scents, immediately stopped their wrestling match. They approached the carrier cautiously, noses twitching, tails held low with uncertainty. They could smell cat, familiar yet different, overlaid with the alien sense of the clinic. John held his breath, his heart pounding. This was the moment. Would she recognize them? Would they accept her? He opened the carrier door. Bella hesitated for a long moment, peering out warily. Then slowly, stiffly, she eased herself out. She stood unsteadily, surveying the room, her gaze sharp and assessing despite her physical weakness. The kittens edged closer, mewing softly, a mixture of curiosity and trepidation in their tiny sounds. The bold orange tabby Blaze was the first to brave contact, inching forward and giving Bella's leg a tentative sniff. Bella flinched slightly, then lowered her head. She sniffed Blaze thoroughly, her whiskers twitching. A low rumble started deep in her chest, not a growl, but a purr. A rusty, hesitant sound, but undeniably a purr. She nudged Blaze gently with her nose, then turned her attention to the others who had gathered around. Patches, Shadow, the gray one, and Ink, the black runt. She sniffed each one in turn, her purr growing stronger, steadier. Then she began to lick. Starting with Blaze, she gave each kitten a thorough maternal bath, her rough tongue working gently over their fur. The kittens responded instantly, pressing against her, vying for her attention, their own tiny purrs erupting in a chorus of contentment. They clambered over her carefully, mindful of her injuries, as if sensing her fragility, nuzzling against her neck, kneading her sides with their paws. Bella, despite her obvious discomfort from the healing pelvis, settled onto the rug, allowing her babies to swarm her, her eyes half closed in what looked like exhausted bliss. John watched from the doorway, tears blurring his vision. He hadn't realized he was crying until a tear tracked down his cheek. The worry, the exhaustion, the financial strain of the past 2 months seemed to melt away in that instant, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and profound joy. The fragmented pieces of this little family were finally whole again, reunited against all odds. The central question, whether this broken mother and her orphaned children could survive and find each other, had been answered. Yes, against staggering odds, fueled by a stranger's compassion and her own incredible resilience, Bella had come home. The miracle wasn't just her survival. It was this moment, this quiet symphony of purrs and gentle licks on his living room floor. The weeks following Bella's homecoming marked the beginning of their new normal. John confined Bella initially to the spare room, as per Dr. Evans' instructions, allowing her pelvis to fully heal without the temptation of jumping or excessive movement. He brought the kittens in for supervised visits several times a day. These reunions were always touching. Bella's purrs would fill the small room as the kittens tumbled around her, nursing eagerly or simply curling up against her warmth. Bella proved to be a devoted, if slightly handicapped mother. Her limp remained noticeable, a permanent reminder of her ordeal, but it didn't stop her from grooming her kittens meticulously, patiently tolerating their playful antics, and keeping a watchful eye on their explorations. John gradually increased her freedom within the house, always monitoring her to ensure she didn't overexert herself. The financial strain eased slightly. Word of Bella's dramatic rescue and John's dedication had quietly spread through the neighborhood, sparked initially by Maria at the vet clinic and amplified by neighbors who'd noticed John's frequent, exhausted trips at all hours. People started dropping off bags of kitten food, offering donations towards the staggering vet bill, or simply stopping by to express admiration and offer help. O'Malley's Pub even held a small fundraiser night. John, initially hesitant to accept charity, was deeply touched by the outpouring of community support. It didn't cover everything, but it lessened the burden significantly, reaffirming his faith in the kindness of strangers. His quiet, solitary life was irrevocably changed. His house, once echoing with silence, was now filled with the sounds of kitten mischief, contented purrs, and the soft patting of paws. His days still revolved around feeding schedules, litter box maintenance, and now managing a 5-cat household, but the frantic anxiety was replaced by a fulfilling routine. He found immense satisfaction in watching the kittens grow strong and confident under their mother's care, and seeing Bella, once a broken creature on the brink of death, blossom into a relaxed, affectionate house cat. She would often seek him out, rubbing against his legs or settling beside him on the armchair, her purr a constant soothing presence. John Peterson, the retired mechanic who just wanted a quiet life, had inadvertently become the guardian of a small feline dynasty. He hadn't sought it out, but he wouldn't trade it. The emptiness left by Martha's passing felt less cavernous now, filled by the chaotic, demanding, yet deeply rewarding presence of Bella and her brood. He looked at the sleek, healthy calico cat curled up on the rug, her 4 boisterous offspring nearby, and smiled. Bella's story wasn't just about survival, it was about the unexpected connections that give life meaning, the resilience of the maternal spirit, and the quiet miracles that can unfold when compassion meets hope. He had saved her, yes, but in doing so, he had also saved a part of himself.